Catherine Sterling's hand flies toward Naomi's face, but Marcus catches her wrist mid-swing. "Don't touch my mother." The grandson she tried to erase confronts the woman who lied for 18 years. One near slap, 3 generations, a devastating truth. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from and don't forget to click subscribe. Naomi Richardson's hands trembled as she held the envelope with the Vertex Technologies logo embossed in silver. The paper felt expensive, heavy, the kind of quality that whispered wealth in a language she'd almost forgotten. Her son Marcus stood beside her in their cramped Brooklyn apartment, his dark eyes wide with the kind of hope that both thrilled and terrified her. The late afternoon sun streamed through their single window, catching dust motes that danced like tiny promises in the air. Marcus was 17, brilliant, and completely unaware that the scholarship he'd just won came from the company founded by the man who was his father. The man who thought he was dead. "Open it, Mom," Marcus urged, practically bouncing on the balls of his feet. His afro was freshly picked out, and he wore the one button-down shirt they'd bought from the thrift store for his scholarship interview last month. He'd grown so tall this past year, shooting up to 6 feet, all lean muscle and nervous energy. Naomi's heart squeezed. He looked so much like Ethan it physically hurt sometimes. The same sharp jawline, the same way his left eyebrow quirked up when he was excited, the same long fingers that were always gesturing when he talked about coding or mathematics, or whatever brilliant thing had captured his imagination that week. The only things Marcus got from her were his beautiful dark skin, his full lips, and thank God, her sense of humor. Because without humor, Naomi would have drowned in the ocean of grief and rage that had defined the first few years after Ethan disappeared from her life. Naomi carefully opened the envelope, using her fingernail to slide under the seal rather than tearing it. Some part of her wanted to preserve this moment, to keep it pristine before reality came crashing in. Inside was a thick cream-colored card with elegant script that announced Marcus Richardson as the recipient of the Vertex Technologies Future Innovators Full Scholarship, full ride to MIT, room and board included, summer internship program, mentorship with company executives. It was everything Marcus had dreamed of, everything Naomi had worked 3 jobs to help him achieve. And it came from the company founded by Ethan Sterling, the man who had loved her once with a fierce intensity that made her believe in fairy tales, then vanished when she needed him most. Marcus let out a whoop that probably woke their downstairs neighbor, grabbed Naomi around the waist and spun her in a circle. Their tiny living room barely had space for such exuberance, and Naomi's hip clipped the coffee table, but she didn't care. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Her baby was going to MIT. Her brilliant, kind, funny son was going to get the education he deserved. "I did it, Mom," Marcus said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her shoulders. "I actually did it." "We did it, baby," Naomi corrected, reaching up to cup his face. "We did it together." She didn't add that this scholarship came from blood money, from the man who should have been there for first steps and scraped knees in science fairs. She didn't say that Ethan Sterling's company had made billions while she worked at a diner, a call center, and cleaned offices at night to keep them fed. She just smiled at her son and let him have this moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. The acceptance letter stated that all scholarship recipients and their families were invited to a gala event at Vertex Technologies headquarters in 2 weeks. It was a black tie affair, a celebration where Marcus would meet his mentor and the executives who would shape his future. Naomi's stomach turned to ice. She'd have to see him. After 18 years of carefully constructed distance, of building a life that didn't include Ethan Sterling except as a ghost that haunted her dreams, she'd have to stand in the same room and pretend her entire world hadn't imploded when he left. She'd have to shake his hand and smile and act like he was just another wealthy executive and not the man whose child she'd raised alone. The man who believed that child was dead. That night, after Marcus finally fell asleep, his laptop still open to MIT's website on his bed, Naomi sat on their worn couch and let herself remember. She rarely allowed it, had trained herself to lock those memories in a box labeled ancient history. But tonight they came flooding back with the force of a dam breaking. She was 22 again, working as a barista at an upscale coffee shop near NYU, putting herself through community college and dreaming of becoming a graphic designer. Ethan had walked in on a rainy Tuesday morning, soaked through his expensive suit, looking simultaneously frustrated and amused. He'd ordered a complicated drink, something with 3 shots of espresso and oat milk and caramel. But when Naomi handed it to him, their fingers touched, and something electric passed between them. It was such a cliché, the kind of meet-cute from romantic comedies she used to mock, but it happened anyway. He'd smiled at her with those gray eyes that seemed to see right through her careful defenses, and asked if she'd like to grab dinner sometime. She'd said yes. God help her. She'd said yes without hesitation. Their first date was at a hole-in-the-wall Thai restaurant in the village. Ethan wore jeans and a t-shirt, clearly trying to dress down, but he moved through the world with that unconscious confidence that came from never having to worry about money. Naomi wore her best dress, the emerald green one she'd saved up for, and tried not to feel self-conscious about the fact that she'd taken 2 buses to get there because she didn't have money for a cab. They talked for hours. Ethan told her about growing up in Connecticut, about parents who loved him but didn't understand him, about starting Vertex Technologies in his college dorm room with 2 friends and a crazy idea about revolutionizing data security. Naomi told him about growing up in South Brooklyn, about her mother who died when she was 16, about the aunt who took her in but made it clear she was a burden, about dreams of creating art that made people feel something. He'd listened with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the universe. When he walked her to the bus stop that night, he'd kissed her softly and asked if he could see her again tomorrow. She'd said yes again, and that yes changed everything. For 6 months, they existed in a bubble of impossible happiness. Ethan would pick her up after her shifts at the coffee shop in his sleek car that probably cost more than her annual tuition. They'd drive to the beach at midnight and watch the stars. He'd take her to his favorite bookstore and buy her armfuls of graphic novels and art books. She'd cook for him in her tiny studio apartment, teaching him to make her mother's jerk chicken, laughing when he couldn't handle the spice. They'd stay up all night talking about everything and nothing, about artificial intelligence and color theory, and whether the universe was infinite or just really, really big. He'd tell her about board meetings and venture capital and the pressure of running a company that was growing faster than anyone expected. She'd tell him about struggling to choose between paying rent and buying art supplies, about working 3 jobs and still falling behind, about feeling invisible in a city full of people. He'd hold her and say she was the most visible person he'd ever known, that she lit up every room she entered, that he was falling in love with her. The first crack appeared when Ethan took her to a company dinner. It was at some exclusive restaurant with a Michelin star and a 6-month waiting list. Naomi wore a dress Ethan had insisted on buying her, something designer and elegant that made her feel like an imposter. The dinner was full of venture capitalists and tech executives and their wives or girlfriends, all of whom seemed to speak a language Naomi didn't understand. They discussed market disruption and IPO timelines and portfolio optimization. When someone asked Naomi what she did, and she said she was a barista working on an associate degree, the woman's smile turned pitying. "Oh, how wonderful that you're pursuing education," she'd said in a tone that suggested it was anything but wonderful. Ethan had squeezed Naomi's hand under the table, but he'd also laughed at their jokes about poor people, about how amusing it was that his secretary couldn't figure out how to work the espresso machine. Naomi had excused herself to the bathroom and cried quietly in a stall that was nicer than her entire apartment. That night, they'd fought for the first time. Naomi accused Ethan of being ashamed of her, of wanting her to change into someone who fit his world. Ethan insisted that wasn't true, that he loved her exactly as she was. But couldn't she see that he was trying to share his life with her? Couldn't she make an effort to fit in? Just a little. They'd made up in the way young lovers do, with passionate apologies and promises to do better. But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted, a whisper that maybe they were too different, that love wasn't always enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. The seed grew slowly over the next few weeks as more cracks appeared. Ethan's mother invited them to dinner at the family estate in Connecticut, a sprawling mansion that made Naomi feel like a character in a period drama about class warfare. His mother was polite in the way that rich white women were polite when they wanted you to know you weren't welcome. She'd asked Naomi where her people were from in a tone that suggested she meant Africa, not Brooklyn. She'd commented on Naomi's natural hair, reaching out to touch it without permission, saying how exotic it looked. Ethan hadn't said a word in Naomi's defense. had just sat there looking uncomfortable while his mother cataloged all the ways Naomi didn't measure up. The breaking point came 3 weeks later when Naomi discovered she was pregnant. She'd been feeling nauseated for days, exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fix, emotional in ways that seemed out of proportion to life's small annoyances. The pregnancy test she took in the tiny bathroom of the coffee shop showed 2 pink lines that felt like both a miracle and a catastrophe. She was 23, barely scraping by, in love with a man whose world seemed increasingly incompatible with hers. But despite all that, she felt a fierce surge of joy. A baby. Their baby. A tiny person who would be part her and part Ethan, who would have his brilliance and her creativity, his drive and her resilience. She imagined telling him, imagined his face lighting up with surprise and happiness. She bought a little pair of baby shoes, yellow because she didn't know yet if it would be a boy or girl, and planned to give them to him at dinner that night. Ethan had been different that evening, distracted and tense. His company was in the middle of a crucial funding round, and the pressure was enormous. Naomi had cooked his favorite meal, had set the little shoes on the table as a surprise, but before she could tell him, he'd started talking. His investors were concerned about his image, about his personal life. They thought he needed to be more stable, more settled. His board had suggested he consider dating someone from their circles, someone who understood the business world. His mother had set him up on a dinner with Victoria Ashworth, daughter of a major investor. It didn't mean anything, he insisted. It was just business. But would Naomi mind if he went? Just this once, to keep the investors happy? And maybe, he'd added, his voice careful, maybe they should take a break, just for a few months while he got the company through this crucial phase. They could still see each other, but more quietly, without the pressure of his world judging her, or her world judging him. It would be better for both of them. Naomi had looked at the yellow baby shoes on the table, at the man she loved suggesting they downgrade their relationship for business reasons, and something in her shattered. She didn't tell him about the baby. Instead, she said if he wanted a break, they should make it permanent. Ethan had looked surprised, maybe even hurt, but he'd nodded. Maybe you're right, he'd said. Maybe we got caught up in something that was never going to work. The words had felt like knives. Naomi had kept her face neutral, had thanked him for the lovely 6 months, had walked him to the door of her apartment like they were casual acquaintances instead of lovers who'd shared everything. The moment the door closed, she'd collapsed on the floor and sobbed until she thought her chest would crack open. She'd sobbed for the man she loved who didn't love her enough to fight for them, for the baby growing inside her who would never know their father, for the future she'd imagined that was dying before it even began. The next morning, Naomi made a decision. She would keep the baby and raise it alone. She wouldn't tell Ethan, wouldn't trap him into a relationship or parenthood he clearly didn't want. She'd be enough for this child. She'd love them enough for 2 parents. She'd give them everything she had, every ounce of strength and determination and fierce love. She moved out of Manhattan to Brooklyn, found a cheaper apartment, quit school to work full-time. Her pregnancy was difficult, marked by complications that landed her in the hospital twice. At 34 weeks, she went into early labor. The doctors rushed her into emergency surgery. She remembered the bright lights, the antiseptic smell, the fear that she was going to lose this baby who was already the center of her universe. Then everything went dark. When Naomi woke up in the recovery room, there was a social worker by her bed. The woman's face was compassionate but professional as she explained that Naomi had given birth to a son. He was tiny, just over 4 pounds, but he was a fighter. He was in the NICU, breathing on his own, strong despite his early arrival. But there had been complications with the birth. They'd had to call her emergency contact, the one she'd forgotten to change after the breakup. They'd called Ethan. The social worker said he'd come to the hospital, had demanded to see Naomi, had been aggressive and upset when they told him she was in surgery. Then he'd disappeared, just left. When the hospital tried to reach him again to inform him about the baby's status, his lawyers sent a letter. Ethan Sterling denied paternity. He claimed Naomi was attempting to trap him, to extort money from him. His lawyers threatened legal action if she continued to harass him. They suggested she'd been seeing other men during their relationship, that the child couldn't be his. The letter was cold, legal, devastating. Naomi had stared at the social worker in disbelief. This had to be a mistake. Ethan wouldn't do this. He might not want to be with her, but he wouldn't abandon his own child. He wouldn't lie and claim Marcus wasn't his. The social worker gently suggested that sometimes men panicked when faced with unexpected parenthood, that his reaction wasn't unusual for wealthy men who feared being trapped. She'd said it kindly, but the implication was clear. Ethan Sterling wanted nothing to do with Naomi or the baby. He was denying them, erasing them from his life as if they'd never existed. Naomi had lain in that hospital bed, her body aching from surgery, her heart shattered into pieces so small she didn't think they could ever be reassembled, and made another decision. She would never contact Ethan again. She wouldn't beg or plead or try to prove Marcus was his. She would raise her son to be a man nothing like his father. She would teach him kindness and integrity, and the value of every human being regardless of their bank account. She would love him so completely that he'd never feel the absence of the man who should have been there. But Ethan's rejection did something worse than simply abandoning them. His family's lawyers had somehow gotten Naomi's medical records, had twisted the complications of her pregnancy and Marcus's premature birth into a false narrative. Ethan was told that the baby had died during birth. That's what his mother told her wealthy friends at the country club. What his PR team told the media when gossip started spreading about a secret baby. Ethan Sterling's brief relationship with a barista had ended tragically when their child was stillborn. It was a neat, sad story that garnered him sympathy and neatly erased Naomi and Marcus from existence. Naomi only found this out years later, when she saw an interview with Ethan in Forbes magazine. The reporter had asked about his personal life, about whether the tragic loss of a child had influenced his focus on technology. Ethan had said yes. Losing his son had devastated him, had made him throw himself into work to cope with the grief. He'd looked genuinely sad in the photograph accompanying the article, his gray eyes haunted in a way that might have moved Naomi if she hadn't been holding their very alive 5-year-old son while reading the interview. Marcus had asked why she was crying. She'd said allergies and never looked at another article about Ethan Sterling again, except she couldn't entirely avoid him. Vertex Technologies grew into one of the most successful companies in the world. Ethan's face was everywhere, on magazine covers and tech blogs and business news programs. He dated models and actresses and eventually married Victoria Ashworth, the investor's daughter his mother had set him up with. They divorced 5 years later, a split that made headlines and cost Ethan a significant portion of his fortune. He never remarried, never had other children. In interviews, he occasionally referenced the son he'd lost, the tragedy that shaped him. Naomi wanted to scream at the television that his son was alive, brilliant, and nothing like him. But she stayed silent, protecting Marcus from a man who'd already rejected him once. She told Marcus his father had died before he was born, that he'd been a good man who would have loved him. It was a lie, but it was kinder than the truth. Now, standing in their small apartment with the Vertex Technologies scholarship letter in her hand, Naomi realized her careful protection was about to shatter. Marcus would meet Ethan. Her son would shake hands with his father, completely unaware of their connection. And Ethan would have no idea that the brilliant young black student receiving his scholarship was the son he thought had died 18 years ago. The son he'd denied and abandoned. The son whose mother he'd accused of lying and extortion. Naomi felt panic rising in her throat like bile. She couldn't let this happen. She had to find a way to protect Marcus from this collision of past and present, from the truth that could devastate him. But how could she tell her son he couldn't accept the scholarship without explaining why? How could she rob him of this opportunity he'd worked so hard for, without revealing the secret she'd kept his entire life? The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of anxiety. Naomi borrowed money from her coworker at the diner to buy a dress for the gala, something simple and black that wouldn't draw attention. Marcus rented a tux from the same thrift store where they'd bought his interview shirt. He was so excited he could barely sleep, talking constantly about meeting the Vertex Technologies executives, about starting at MIT in the fall, about the future opening up before him like a door to paradise. Naomi listened and smiled and felt like she was walking toward a cliff edge, knowing that when she fell, she'd take Marcus with her. She considered faking an illness, claiming she couldn't attend the gala. But Marcus would go alone, would meet Ethan without her there to control the situation. She considered telling Marcus the truth, sitting him down and explaining everything. But every time she tried to form the words, they stuck in her throat. How did you tell your son that his father thought he was dead? That his father had abandoned them before he was born? That the man offering him a scholarship was the man who denied his existence? The night of the gala arrived with the inevitability of a storm. Naomi and Marcus took the subway to Manhattan, emerging at Bryant Park, and walking the few blocks to Vertex Technologies' headquarters. The building was sleek glass and steel, reaching into the night sky like a monument to ambition and success. The lobby was filled with people in evening wear, scholarship recipients and their families mingling with company executives and major donors. Servers in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than Naomi's weekly grocery budget. Marcus's eyes were wide, taking in everything with the wonder of someone seeing a different world for the first time. "Mom," he whispered, "this is incredible." Naomi squeezed his hand, her own palm sweaty with nerves. She scanned the crowd for Ethan, for that tall figure with the gray eyes and the unconscious arrogance. But she didn't see him yet. Maybe he wouldn't attend. Maybe he'd send a representative, someone else to hand out the scholarships. Maybe she'd get through this night without having to face him. Then the crowd parted, and there he was. Ethan Sterling in the flesh. Older, but still recognizably the man she'd loved. His dark hair was threaded with silver now, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 18 years ago. He'd filled out a bit, the boyish slimness replaced by the solid build of a man in his early 40s. But he moved with that same confidence, that same sense of owning every space he occupied. He wore a tuxedo that was undoubtedly custom-made, and he worked the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and smiling, and making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. Naomi's breath caught in her throat, her vision tunneled. The noise of the gala faded to a distant hum. She was 22 again, watching him walk into the coffee shop, feeling that electric jolt of connection. Except now that connection was wrapped in layers of hurt and anger, and 18 years of raising their son alone. Marcus tugged on her arm. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Naomi tore her eyes away from Ethan, forced a smile. "I'm fine, baby. Just a little overwhelmed by all this. Come on, let's get you some food. You're always starving." They moved toward the buffet table, and Naomi positioned herself so her back was to the crowd, so she could avoid seeing Ethan for as long as possible. But she could feel him in the room like a magnetic pull, could sense his presence even when she wasn't looking. Marcus filled a plate with fancy appetizers, trying everything and making running commentary about which ones were good and which ones tasted like pretentious nothing. Despite her anxiety, Naomi laughed. Her son had a gift for finding humor in any situation, for staying grounded even when surrounded by wealth and privilege that should have intimidated him. It was one of the things she'd worked hardest to teach him, that self-worth came from character, not bank accounts, that he was just as valuable as any of these rich people in their designer clothes. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed through the speakers, echoing off the glass walls. A man in his 50s stood at a microphone, smiling broadly. "If I could have your attention, please. We're about to begin the scholarship presentation ceremony. All recipients and their families, please gather near the stage." Naomi's heart hammered as she and Marcus joined the other families. There were 5 scholarship recipients total, 4 young men and 1 young woman, all brilliant students from underprivileged backgrounds. The program included a speech from each recipient, followed by the presentation of their scholarship certificates by company executives. Marcus would be last, the prize winner, the student with the highest scores and the most impressive achievements. He'd be presented with his certificate by Ethan Sterling himself. Naomi felt dizzy. She should leave. She should grab Marcus's hand and run out of this building and never look back. But her feet were rooted to the floor, and Marcus was already stepping toward the stage with the other recipients, his face glowing with pride and excitement. The ceremony began. Each student gave their speech, talking about where they came from and where they hoped to go, about dreams of changing the world through technology. The executives presented their certificates with warm handshakes and encouraging words. Naomi barely heard any of it over the roaring in her ears. Then it was Marcus's turn. He walked to the microphone with that easy confidence he'd inherited from his father, adjusted it to his height, and smiled at the crowd. His speech was different from the others. He talked about his mother, about watching her work 3 jobs to keep them housed and fed, about learning what real strength looked like from a woman who never gave up despite having every reason to. He talked about growing up without much money but being rich in love, about wanting to use technology not just to get rich, but to solve real problems for real people. He talked about wanting to make his mother proud, to show her that all her sacrifices had been worth it. His voice cracked slightly at the end, and Naomi realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face in a way she couldn't control. The crowd applauded enthusiastically, and Ethan Sterling stepped forward to present Marcus's certificate. Naomi watched as her son and his father stood side by side for the first time, as Ethan held out his hand and Marcus shook it. They were almost the same height, Marcus just slightly taller, but the resemblance was unmistakable. They had the same smile, the same way of tilting their head when listening, the same graceful movements. How could no one else see it? How could Ethan not recognize his own son standing right in front of him? But Ethan just smiled his professional CEO smile and handed Marcus the certificate. "Congratulations, Marcus," Ethan said, his voice carrying through the microphone. "Your achievements are remarkable, and we're honored to have you in our program. Tell me, what drew you to apply for this scholarship?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Honestly, sir, the opportunity. Your company's reputation for innovation, the chance to work with the best minds in technology, but also," he paused, "the values your company claims to stand for. You talk a lot about using technology for social good, about making the world more equitable. I want to hold you to that. I want to be part of making sure those aren't just empty words." There was a beat of surprised silence. Then Ethan laughed. A genuine laugh that Naomi remembered from their time together, warm and appreciative. "I like that, Marcus. We need more people willing to hold us accountable. I look forward to seeing how you challenge us over the next 4 years." Marcus grinned, and Naomi saw Ethan's expression shift slightly, saw something flicker across his face too quick to identify. Confusion, maybe, or recognition at some subconscious level. The moment passed, and Ethan moved on to thanking the donors and executives, but his eyes kept drifting back to Marcus, lingering in a way that made Naomi's stomach churn. The ceremony ended, and the crowd dispersed back into mingling and networking. Marcus was immediately surrounded by people congratulating him, asking about his projects and his plans. Naomi tried to fade into the background, but a woman in a designer dress approached her, smiling warmly. "You must be so proud. He's extraordinary." Naomi nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The woman continued chatting, but Naomi barely heard her. Her attention was fixed on Ethan, who was working his way through the crowd, moving in their direction. Then he was there, standing in front of her for the first time in 18 years. "Mrs. Richardson," he said, holding out his hand. "I wanted to personally congratulate you on raising such an impressive young man." His voice was the same, that slight rasp that used to make her shiver. His eyes were the same gray that had once looked at her with such intensity she felt like she could drown in them. But there was no recognition in those eyes now. He looked at her like she was just another parent, just another stranger, at another gala. Naomi stared at his outstretched hand, at the man who'd loved her, and left her, and denied their son, and something snapped. She didn't take his hand. She just looked at him, letting all the hurt and anger of 18 years show on her face, watching as his professional smile faltered. "Do you know who I am?" she asked quietly, her voice shaking. Ethan's expression shifted to confusion. "I'm sorry. Have we met before?" Naomi felt Marcus come up beside her, felt his concern as he touched her shoulder. "Mom, are you okay?" She didn't look away from Ethan's face as she said the words that would change everything, that would shatter the careful lies she'd built to protect them both. "Yes, Ethan, we've met before. And this brilliant young man you just gave a scholarship to, this son you're so impressed by, is your son. The son you thought died 18 years ago." the son you denied and abandoned. She watched the color drain from his face, watched comprehension and horror and disbelief wash over his features. She watched him look at Marcus, really look at him for the first time, and see what he should have seen immediately. His own face reflected back at him. Marcus's voice came from beside her, young and confused and breaking. "Mom, what are you talking about? What does he mean my father is dead?" But Naomi only had eyes for Ethan, watching as he stared at their son and saw his whole world crumbling around him, watching as 18 years of lies caught up with them both. The silence that followed Naomi's revelation was deafening. The chatter of the gala faded into background noise as everyone within earshot turned to stare at the unfolding drama. Marcus stood frozen beside Naomi, his face cycling through emotions so rapidly she couldn't track them all. Confusion gave way to shock, shock to hurt, hurt to anger. Ethan looked like he'd been struck by lightning, his face ashen, his hand still outstretched from the handshake Naomi had refused. His mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. "That's impossible," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "My son died. The doctors told me. My mother confirmed it." Marcus flinched at the words "my son," and Naomi saw her baby retreating into himself, saw the walls going up behind his eyes the way they did when he was hurt and trying to hide it. She reached for him, but he stepped away, shaking his head. "Don't," he said, his voice breaking on the single word. "Just don't, Mom." Security had started moving toward them, clearly unsure whether to intervene in what looked like it might become a scene. Ethan held up a hand to stop them, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. He was drinking in every detail now, seeing what he should have seen immediately. The shape of Marcus's jaw, the way his eyebrows drew together when he was upset, the long fingers that were currently clenched into fists at his sides. "Oh my God," Ethan breathed. "You're really him. You're really my son." Marcus laughed, but it was a bitter sound that made Naomi's heart crack. "Your son," he repeated. "I've been your son for 17 years and you didn't even know I existed. You thought I was dead." His voice rose, drawing more attention. "How does a father not know his kid is alive? How does that even happen?" The anger in his voice was raw and young and devastating. Ethan reached out instinctively, then pulled his hand back when Marcus recoiled. "I can explain. I was told you died. I mourned you. I've mourned you for 18 years. Marcus turned to Naomi, his eyes blazing. "And you told me he was dead. You told me my father died before I was born. You looked me in the eye my whole life and lied to me. Was anything you ever said true? Did you ever actually love me, or was I just some inconvenient mistake you had to deal with?" The accusation hit Naomi like a physical blow. "Baby, no," she started, tears streaming down her face now. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Everything I did was to protect you. I love you more than my own life." "Then why did you lie?" Marcus shouted, and several people gasped at the volume. "Why didn't you tell me the truth? Why didn't you tell me my father was alive and didn't want me? Why let me grow up thinking he was some hero who died tragically when really he just abandoned us?" His voice cracked on the last word, and Naomi saw the little boy inside the almost man. Saw the child who used to ask about his father with such hope in his eyes. Saw all the ways her well-intentioned lies had shaped him. "I was protecting you from rejection," she said desperately. "His family told me the baby died. They lied to him, Marcus. They kept us apart. This isn't his fault or yours or mine. It's their fault." She gestured vaguely, meaning Ethan's family, his lawyers, the whole machine of wealth and privilege that had torn them apart. But Marcus wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at Ethan with an expression that mixed longing and fury in equal measure. "Did you love her?" he asked quietly. "My mom? Did you actually love her, or was she just some poor girl you were slumming with?" Ethan's face twisted with emotion. "I loved her," he said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute truth. "I loved her more than I knew how to handle. I was young and stupid, and I let my family and my company convince me that our relationship was impossible. But I never stopped loving her. When I thought I'd lost both of you, it destroyed me." He looked at Naomi now, really looked at her for the first time, seeing past the years and the hurt to the woman he'd once known. "Naomi. God, Naomi, I didn't know. You have to believe me. I would never have left if I'd known he was alive. I mourned him. I mourned you. I built an entire company trying to fill the hole you left in my life. Naomi felt something in her chest loosen slightly, some small part of the armor she'd built around her heart. But the anger was still there, hot and immediate. You denied him, she said, her voice shaking, before you knew he'd supposedly died. When the hospital first contacted you, your lawyer sent a letter saying he wasn't yours, saying I was trying to trap you, that I'd been seeing other men. You called our baby a lie, Ethan. You rejected him before he even had a chance to live. How do I forgive that? How does he? The color drained from Ethan's face again. What are you talking about? I never sent any letter. I never denied paternity. When the hospital called me about your complications, I drove there immediately. They wouldn't let me see you because I wasn't family. Then a doctor came out and told me there had been complications, that the baby had been born, but didn't survive, that you were devastated and didn't want to see me. My mother was with me. She confirmed it all. She said she'd spoken to the doctors. Marcus interrupted, his voice cold. So let me get this straight. Your mother lied to you about me being dead. She somehow convinced doctors to lie. She had lawyers send fake letters. And you just believed it all without ever checking for yourself? Without demanding to see my mom or me or any actual proof? That's some next-level neglect, man. Even for an absent father. The words were designed to wound, and they hit their mark. Ethan looked like he'd been slapped. You're right, he said simply. You're absolutely right. I should have pushed harder. I should have demanded answers. I should have fought through my grief to get to the truth. But I was 25 and I'd just lost what I thought was my child and the woman I loved. My mother was my only support system, and I trusted her. He laughed bitterly. I shouldn't have. I know that now. A woman in a pearl necklace appeared at Ethan's elbow, clearly one of the company executives. Ethan, she said nervously, perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere more private. The donors are getting concerned. Ethan didn't even look at her. Cancel the rest of the event, he said flatly. Send everyone home. Make whatever excuses you need to make. His eyes never left Marcus's face. This is more important than any donor. This is my son. The woman's eyes widened, but she nodded and hurried away. Within minutes, announcements were being made about an unexpected emergency. Apologies were being offered, and the gala attendees were being efficiently ushered toward the exits. The scholarship recipients and their families were told they'd receive their full awards and be contacted about next steps. Through it all, the three of them stood in their small triangle of devastation, none of them willing to be the first to move or speak, or break whatever fragile thing was forming between them. Marcus finally broke the silence. I need air, he said, his voice flat. I can't breathe in here. He turned and walked toward the exit before Naomi or Ethan could respond. Naomi moved to follow him, but Ethan caught her arm. Wait, he said urgently. Please. Let me talk to him. She wanted to refuse, wanted to keep herself between Marcus and this man who'd already hurt him without even knowing he existed. But something in Ethan's eyes stopped her. He looked terrified and desperate and completely lost. Fine, she said, pulling her arm free. But if you hurt him again, Ethan, if you say one wrong thing, I will destroy you. I don't care how much money you have or how powerful you are. I will burn your whole world down. He nodded, accepting the threat as his due. I know, he said softly. And I'd deserve it. Ethan found Marcus outside the building, sitting on the concrete steps leading down to the street. The night air was cool, carrying the smell of hot dogs and exhaust that was quintessentially New York. Marcus had taken off his bow tie and undone the top button of his shirt. He didn't look up when Ethan sat down beside him, maintaining a careful distance. They sat in silence for a long moment, watching taxis stream past and people hurry along the sidewalks, everyone absorbed in their own dramas and completely unaware that a father and son were meeting for the first time. Finally, Marcus spoke. Did you really mourn me? He asked, his voice small in a way that made him sound much younger than 17. Or is that just something you're saying to make yourself feel better about abandoning us? Ethan's chest tightened. I really mourned you, he said. I had a room in my apartment that I never went into because it was supposed to be your nursery. I funded hospitals and neonatal care facilities in your memory. Every year on what I thought was your birthday, I take the day off, and I just sit and think about what you might have been like. What we might have done together. He paused, his voice rough. I named you in my head. I called you Noah. I don't know why. It just felt right. Marcus's breath hitched. My middle name is Noah, he said. Mom named me Marcus Noah Richardson. She said Noah means rest or comfort, and that I gave her comfort when nothing else could. The coincidence hung between them, fragile and strange. Ethan cleared his throat. Tell me about your life, he said. Please. I want to know everything. Marcus was quiet for so long Ethan thought he might refuse. Then he started talking. His voice stilted at first, but gaining confidence as he went. He told Ethan about growing up in Brooklyn, about the apartment that was too small but filled with love, about his mom working multiple jobs but still showing up to every science fair and school play. He talked about learning to code in the public library because they couldn't afford a computer at home, about the teacher who saw his potential and fought to get him into a better high school, about winning math competitions and building his first app when he was 14. He talked about his mom's sacrifices, how she went without so he could have, how she worked herself to exhaustion but never complained. And the whole time I thought I was fatherless because you were dead, Marcus said, anger creeping back into his voice. I thought you were some tragic figure who would have loved me if only fate hadn't been cruel. But you weren't dead. You were here in Manhattan, building your empire, living your life, not even knowing I existed. How is that fair? How is any of this fair? Ethan had no answer because Marcus was right. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. Your mother did an incredible job raising you, he finally said. You're extraordinary, Marcus. Not because of anything I did, but because of her. Because she loved you enough for two parents. I missed everything, he continued, his voice breaking. I missed your first steps and your first words and teaching you to ride a bike and helping with homework and all the moments that make up a life. I can't get those back. I know that. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your future. I'd like to try to be your father now, even though I know I don't deserve the chance. Marcus turned to look at him directly for the first time. Why should I let you? He asked. Give me one good reason why I should let you into my life when you weren't there for any of the hard parts. Ethan met his eyes, those eyes that were so much like his own. Because I want to know my son, he said simply. Because I want to make up for lost time even though I know I can't. Because I'm standing here, looking at this brilliant young man, and I'm in awe of who you are. And because, he took a shaky breath. Because I already love you, Marcus. I've loved the idea of you for 18 years. Now I want the chance to love the real you. Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Some small crack in his anger. That's a pretty speech, he said. But his voice lacked conviction. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. I've given a lot of speeches over the years. I'm good at saying what people want to hear. But this isn't a speech, Marcus. This is me, terrified and overwhelmed and completely out of my depth, asking for something I have no right to ask for. A chance. That's all. Just a chance to try. Marcus looked away, watching a group of teenagers laughing as they walked past. They looked carefree in a way Marcus had never felt, unburdened by the weight of adult problems and family drama. I don't know if I can trust you, he finally said. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore. Mom lied to me my whole life. You weren't there at all. How do I build something with someone when the foundation is all lies? You start with the truth, Ethan said. No more lies. No more secrets. I tell you everything you want to know. You tell me everything you want me to know and we figure it out as we go. And if it doesn't work, if you decide you don't want me in your life, I'll respect that. But please give me the chance to try. The silence stretched between them again, heavy with possibility. Then Marcus nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Okay," he said. "We can try. But I'm keeping the scholarship. I earned that fair and square. I don't want your charity." Ethan felt relief flood through him so powerfully his hands shook. "It's not charity," he said. "You earned it. You earned it before I even knew who you were. That doesn't change just because we're related." They sat there for a while longer, neither quite ready to go back inside and face Naomi and the wreckage of the evening. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Your mother, the one who lied to you about me. She's still alive, right?" Ethan nodded grimly. "She lives in Connecticut, in the house I grew up in." Marcus's expression hardened. "Then I want to meet her. I want to look her in the eye and ask her why she thought it was okay to erase me from existence. Why she made that choice for you without letting you decide for yourself." Ethan felt a surge of protective anger toward his mother that surprised him with its intensity. "We'll go together," he said. "Tomorrow if you want." "But Marcus, she's not a good person. She's manipulative and elitist, and she thought she was protecting me from what she saw as a mistake. That doesn't make it right, but it might help explain it." "I don't care about explanations," Marcus said flatly. "I care about accountability. She stole 17 years from us. Years we can't get back. She needs to answer for that." Ethan couldn't argue with that logic. "You're right," he said. "She does. And she will." They stood up together, and for a moment they stood facing each other. This father and son who were strangers despite sharing DNA. Ethan wanted to hug Marcus, to pull him close the way he'd imagined doing 1,000 times when he thought about the son he'd lost. But he held back, sensing that Marcus needed space, needed time to process everything before physical affection would feel anything other than presumptuous. Inside the building, Naomi was pacing in the now empty lobby. The gala staff were cleaning up, packing away champagne glasses and leftover appetizers, studiously ignoring the woman who was clearly in distress. When she saw Marcus and Ethan come back in together, she rushed over. "Are you okay?" she asked Marcus, reaching for him. He let her hug him, but didn't return the embrace with his usual enthusiasm. "I'm processing," he said. "And I'm angry at you, Mom. I'm so angry. But I also know you did what you thought was right. I just need time to understand why you thought lying was better than the truth." Naomi nodded, tears streaming down her face again. "Take all the time you need, baby. I'll answer any question you have. I'll tell you everything. She took a shaky breath. "I just need you to know that every decision I made was because I love you. Not because I was trying to hurt you." "I know, Mom," Marcus said quietly. "I know." Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly. "Marcus and I were talking about visiting my mother tomorrow. He wants to confront her about the lies." Naomi's eyes widened. "Ethan? Is that a good idea?" "She's not going to react well to being confronted." "I don't care how she reacts," Marcus said firmly. "She doesn't get to destroy my family and then just live her comfortable life like nothing happened. She needs to know what she did. She needs to face the consequences." The next morning, they drove to Connecticut in Ethan's car, a sleek sedan that probably cost more than Naomi had earned in the past 5 years. The ride was tense, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. Marcus sat in the back, looking out the window at the landscape changing from urban to suburban to the manicured wealth of Connecticut's Gold Coast. Naomi sat in the passenger seat, hyper-aware of Ethan beside her, of his hands on the steering wheel, of the careful distance he maintained between them. This was the first time in 18 years they'd been alone together, if you didn't count Marcus in the back seat with his headphones in. "How have you been?" Ethan asked quietly, his eyes on the road. "Really? Not the brave face you put on for Marcus. How have you actually been?" Naomi considered lying, then remembered Marcus's accusation about her dishonesty. "Tired," she said, honestly. "Scared a lot of the time, worried about money and Marcus's future, and whether I was doing anything right. But also proud. So proud of who he's becoming, despite everything stacked against us." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I should have been there. If I'd known, if I'd had any idea you were struggling, I would have helped." "Would you have?" Naomi challenged gently. Would you really? Or would you have thrown money at the problem and expected that to fix everything while you continued building your empire? Because that's who you were, Ethan. That's who your life trained you to be. He was quiet for a long moment. You're probably right, he finally admitted. The Ethan you knew was selfish and privileged and more concerned with appearances than with people. But losing you, losing what I thought was our son, it changed me, Naomi. It made me realize that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. I've spent 18 years trying to be a better man, trying to use my wealth for good instead of just accumulation. I don't know if I've succeeded, but I've tried. Naomi looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the gala. She saw the lines around his eyes, the silver in his hair, the way exhaustion seemed to live in the set of his shoulders. He looked like a man who'd carried a heavy burden for a long time. Maybe you have changed, she conceded. I saw the programs you fund, the hospitals and schools and community centers. Marcus researched your company before applying for the scholarship. He was impressed by the social impact initiatives. Said it was rare to see a tech company actually living its values instead of just talking about them. Ethan glanced at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. Did he really say that? He did, Naomi confirmed. He said you put your money where your mouth is, that it's why he wanted to work for Vertex Technologies. He wanted to be part of something that mattered. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He really is extraordinary, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I keep looking at him and thinking, how did I get so lucky? How did we create someone so much better than either of us? We didn't create him together, Naomi said, and the words came out harsher than she intended. I created him. I carried him. I raised him alone while you were living your life. I'm sorry, Ethan. I know you didn't know he was alive, but I can't just forget 18 years of doing it alone. I can't just forgive and move on like none of it happened. I'm not asking you to forget, Ethan said quietly. And I'm not asking for forgiveness I haven't earned. I'm just asking for a chance to be part of his life going forward. And maybe, he hesitated, maybe eventually a chance to be part of yours again too. Not like before. I know we can't go back. But maybe we could build something new. Something better. Naomi felt her chest constrict. Ethan, I don't know if I can do that. Too much has happened. Too much hurt. I know, he said. But Naomi, I never stopped loving you. Even when I thought you wanted nothing to do with me. Even when I thought I'd lost everything. You were the one that got away. The one I measured everyone else against, and they all fell short. Naomi closed her eyes against the surge of emotion his words provoked. That's not fair, she whispered. You don't get to say things like that after 18 years. You don't get to make me feel things I can't afford to feel. Why not? Ethan asked. His voice was gentle but insistent. Why can't you afford to feel, Naomi? What are you so afraid of? That you'll leave again, she said, opening her eyes and looking at him. That I'll let myself love you and you'll realize I'm still just a poor girl from Brooklyn who doesn't fit in your world. That Marcus will get hurt when it all falls apart. That I'll survive losing you once, but I won't survive it twice. Ethan pulled the car over to the side of the road, put it in park, and turned to face her fully. Marcus stirred in the back seat, but didn't take out his headphones. Naomi Richardson, Ethan said, his gray eyes intense in a way that made her breath catch. You were never just anything. You were the woman who made me believe in magic, who showed me that money means nothing if you don't have love. You were the only person who ever saw me as just Ethan, not as a Sterling or a CEO or a trust fund. You were real in a world of fake people, and I was too stupid and too weak to fight for us. But I'm not that man anymore. I've had 18 years to become someone worthy of a second chance. Someone strong enough to fight for what matters. Please give me the chance to prove it. Naomi felt tears sliding down her face. This was everything she dreamed of in those early years, when Marcus was little, and she was so tired she could barely stand. She'd imagined Ethan showing up, explaining it was all a mistake, declaring his love and whisking them away to some easier life. But she wasn't that young woman anymore, and fairy tales had stopped seeming possible a long time ago. I need time, she said finally. I need to see who you are now, not just hear you say it. And Marcus needs to come first. Whatever happens or doesn't happen between us, he can't be collateral damage again. Agreed, Ethan said without hesitation. Marcus comes first. Always. He put the car back in drive and pulled back onto the road. In the back seat, Marcus took out one headphone. That was intense, he said. Are you two going to keep pretending I can't hear everything even with music on? They arrived at the Sterling estate an hour later. The house was exactly as pretentious as Naomi remembered. A massive colonial mansion, with white columns and perfectly manicured gardens. A maid answered the door, her expression polite but curious, as she took in their unlikely group. Is Mrs. Sterling expecting you? She asked Ethan. No, he said curtly. But she'll see me. Tell her I brought guests she'll want to meet. The maid led them to a sitting room that probably cost more to decorate than Naomi's entire apartment building. Everything was silk and mahogany and old money, the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself, because it simply was. Marcus looked around with barely disguised contempt. This is where you grew up? He asked Ethan. This is it, Ethan confirmed. What do you think? I think it's lonely, Marcus said bluntly. All this space and nothing warm about it. No pictures of family, no personal touches. Just expensive things trying to convince people they matter. Before Ethan could respond, his mother swept into the room. Catherine Sterling was in her 60s, tall and thin with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a designer dress that probably cost thousands. She was beautiful in the way wealthy white women were beautiful, all polish and maintenance and subtle work that wasn't supposed to be noticeable. Her smile was warm when she saw Ethan, but faltered when she took in Naomi and Marcus. Ethan, darling, she said, kissing his cheek. What an unexpected surprise. Who are your guests? Her eyes lingered on Marcus with something that might have been recognition, or might have been distaste. Naomi couldn't tell which. Ethan stepped back, positioning himself between his mother and Marcus in a gesture that was clearly protective. Mother, he said, his voice cold in a way Naomi had never heard. I'd like you to meet someone. This is Marcus Richardson. Does that name mean anything to you? Catherine's face went carefully blank, the kind of blankness that took practice. I'm afraid not, she said smoothly. Should it? Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He's your grandson, he said flatly. The son you told me died 18 years ago. The son whose mother you accused of lying and extortion. The son you erased from existence because he didn't fit your vision of what my life should look like. The color drained from Catherine's face, but she recovered quickly. I don't know what lies this woman has been telling you, she said, looking at Naomi with undisguised contempt. But I certainly never erased anyone. I was told by doctors that the child had died. I was told that this woman, she said the word like a curse, was trying to trap you with a baby that might not even be yours. I was protecting you, Ethan. That's what mothers do. That's what mothers do, Marcus repeated, his voice shaking with rage. They lie to their children. They destroy other people's families. They make sure their grandson grows up without a father because they're too racist and classist to accept his mother. Catherine looked at Marcus like he was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. I won't be spoken to that way by anyone, especially not by some child who doesn't understand how the world works. He's not some child, Ethan roared, and everyone flinched at the volume. He's my son, your grandson, and you stole him from me. You lied to me for 18 years. You let me mourn a child who was alive. You let Naomi struggle alone to raise him. What kind of monster does that? What kind of person puts their prejudices above their own child's happiness? Catherine drew herself up to her full height. I did what was necessary, she said coldly. That woman was beneath you, Ethan. She had no education, no breeding, no prospects. And a mixed-race child, she shuddered. Can you imagine what that would have done to your position in society? Your company was just getting started. You needed the right kind of wife, the right kind of family. I made sure you had the chance at the life you deserved. Naomi had heard enough. She stood up, walked over to Catherine, and looked her straight in the eye. The life he deserved, she said quietly but with steel in her voice, was one with his son. The life he deserved was making his own choices instead of having a bitter, small-minded woman make them for him. You didn't protect him, Mrs. Sterling. You robbed him. And you know what's funny? Marcus turned out extraordinary despite you. Despite everything you did to prevent his existence from mattering. He's brilliant and kind and strong. He's everything you're not. And he's everything Ethan was supposed to be before you twisted him into something acceptable to your narrow little world. Catherine's hand flew up as if to slap Naomi, but Marcus was faster. He caught her wrist mid-swing, his grip firm but not painful. "Don't touch my mother," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't get to hurt her anymore. You've done enough damage for one lifetime." He released her wrist and stepped back. "Ethan, I think we should go. There's nothing here worth staying for." But Ethan wasn't ready to leave yet. He looked at his mother with something like pity. "I've spent my whole adult life trying to make you proud," he said. "Trying to live up to your expectations. Building the perfect company, dating the right women, doing everything you said would make me successful. And you know what? It made me miserable. The only time I was ever really happy was with Naomi. The only time I ever felt like myself was when I was with her. And you took that from me. You took everything that mattered and left me with money and success and emptiness. I was wrong, Mother. You weren't protecting me. You were making sure I'd end up as lonely and bitter as you are." Catherine's face crumpled slightly, the first real emotion breaking through her careful mask. "Ethan, I did what I thought was best." "You thought what was best was lying," Ethan said. "You thought what was best was destroying lives to maintain appearances. Well, congratulations. You succeeded. You kept me away from my son for 17 years. You made sure Naomi struggled alone. You built exactly the life you wanted for me, and I hate it. I hate what I became because of you. But the good news is, I don't have to be that person anymore." He turned to Naomi and Marcus. "Let's go. I never want to see this house or this woman again." Marcus nodded, already heading for the door. Naomi followed, but she paused at the threshold and looked back at Catherine. "One more thing, Mrs. Sterling," she said. "Thank you." Catherine blinked in confusion. "Thank you?" Naomi smiled, and it was genuine. "Thank you for being so terrible that I got to raise Marcus alone. Because if you'd accepted us, if Ethan had been part of his life from the beginning, Marcus might have learned your values. He might have grown up thinking money and status mattered more than character. Instead, he grew up knowing what real love looks like. He grew up understanding struggle and empathy, and that people matter more than possessions. So thank you for your prejudice and your lies and your manipulation. You gave me the gift of raising my son my way. And look how he turned out." Catherine said nothing, just watched them leave with an expression Naomi couldn't read. They didn't speak again until they were back in the car and pulling away from the estate. Marcus was the first to break the silence. "So that was my grandmother," he said. "She's even worse than I imagined." "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "I should have warned you better. I should have prepared you for how awful she is." "It's fine," Marcus said. "Honestly, it helps. It explains a lot about why things happened the way they did. And it makes it easier to be glad I didn't grow up in that house. No kid should have to grow up feeling like they're never good enough." The drive back to Brooklyn was lighter somehow, as if confronting Catherine had released something in all of them. They talked about easier things, about Marcus's plans for MIT, about Ethan's work, about Naomi's dream of going back to school for graphic design. When they pulled up outside Naomi and Marcus's apartment building, none of them moved to get out right away. "So," Marcus said from the back seat, "what happens now?" "Now," Ethan said, turning to look at him, "we figure out how to be a family, if that's what you want." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Can we start slow?" he asked. "Maybe dinner once a week or something? I'm not ready for some big dramatic reunion where we pretend everything is fine. I'm still angry and confused, and I don't know how to do this." "Dinner once a week sounds perfect," Ethan said, relief evident in his voice. "We go at your pace, Marcus. Whatever you need." "And Mom?" Marcus asked, looking at Naomi. "Are you okay with this? With him being around?" Naomi looked at Ethan, at the man she'd loved and lost and somehow found again. "I'm okay with it," she said. "I'm terrified and I don't know how this is going to work and I'm still processing everything. But I'm okay with trying. For you. And," she admitted quietly, "maybe for me too." Over the following months, they built something new from the ruins of the past. Dinner once a week became twice a week, became Ethan showing up at random times with groceries or concert tickets, or just wanting to see them. He and Marcus developed their own relationship, slowly and carefully, learning each other's rhythms and boundaries. Ethan taught Marcus about business and coding and all the things he'd missed. Marcus taught Ethan about humility and perspective, and what really mattered. They argued sometimes, tensions flaring when Marcus felt smothered, or Ethan felt shut out. But they always came back together, always worked through it, because they both wanted the relationship more than they wanted to be right. And slowly, carefully, Naomi and Ethan rebuilt something too. It wasn't the intense, passionate love of their youth. It was something steadier, more mature, built on shared history and shared hope. They talked about everything, all the years apart, all the hurt and missed moments. Ethan told her about the relationships that failed, because no one was her, about building a company to fill the void she left. Naomi told him about the exhaustion and fear of single parenthood, about the nights she cried after Marcus went to sleep, about the strength she didn't know she had until she needed it. They didn't rush into anything physical or romantic. They just learned to be friends again, then something more than friends, then partners in raising their extraordinary son. 1 year after the gala, Marcus started at MIT with Ethan's full support and Naomi's fierce pride. He thrived there, making friends and excelling in his classes and working summers at Vertex Technologies, where his ideas were valued not because of nepotism, but because they were brilliant. Naomi enrolled in design school, finally pursuing the dream she'd set aside when Marcus was born. Ethan paid for it, not as charity, but as a gift, as restitution for all the years she'd struggled. She let him, learning to accept help without feeling like she was losing her independence. And Ethan transformed his company's scholarship program, expanding it to support not just students, but their families. He funded childcare and housing and mental health services, creating a model other companies copied. He called it the Marcus Initiative, and when people asked about the name, he told them it honored his son, who taught him that the best investment anyone could make was in people. The night of Marcus's college graduation, they all went to dinner at the same Thai restaurant where Ethan and Naomi had their first date decades earlier. It was still a hole in the wall, still served the same spicy food, still had the same charm that had drawn them together. Over pad thai and spring rolls, Marcus raised his glass. "To the weirdest family in New York," he said with a grin. "To a mom who's the strongest person I know. To a dad who showed up late, but showed up right. And to whatever crazy universe brought us all together, in the most dramatic way possible." They clinked glasses, laughing, and Naomi felt a peace she hadn't known she was searching for. It hadn't been easy. There were still hard days and old wounds that ached, but they'd built something real from the wreckage, something worth fighting for. They'd built a family not through blood or obligation, but through choice and forgiveness and stubborn love. And that, Naomi thought, as she looked at her brilliant son and the man who'd once broken her heart, but helped put it back together, that was worth everything.